Welcome to Master Builders Australia's National Leaders Summit. It's great that you can join us for today's broadcast with its special focus on the upcoming federal election. COVID restrictions have meant that we've not been able to hold this year's summit or our annual Builders Barbecue at the National Parliament as we normally do each year. These events are high points for Master Builders. We look forward each year to renewing our relationships with MPs, senators and their staff from the Parliament, and we look forward to being back in person in 2023. For Master Builders Australia, it has been important that we go ahead with this virtual version of the summit, especially in light of the upcoming election. I want to thank our speakers, particularly the leaders of our major political parties, for their part in ensuring that Master Builders' 32,000 members and the hundreds of thousands of business people that earn their living from the building and construction supply chain have this opportunity to hear from them directly. With the federal election nearly upon us, our industry needs to hear them so we can understand how they're going to support our industry to ensure that it can continue playing such a major part in Australia's economic recovery. So let me now introduce our first speaker, the Prime Minister of Australia, the Honourable Scott Morrison MP.
It's wonderful to be with my good friends at the Master Builders. I'm speaking to you from Canberra and I acknowledge the Ngunnawal people, the traditional custodians, and I pay my respects to them, our Indigenous peoples right across the country, to their elders past, present and emerging. I also acknowledge those who have served or are serving in our Defence Forces. They are remarkable men and women, courageous, driven by values, trained well, team-orientated, working to a plan and understanding how to get the job done. So many of them come and work within the building industry. To the leaders and employers who are looking to fill their workforce needs, I say don't go past a veteran. They are the best employees. And I honour our veterans and our service personnel who are with us and thank you for your service. To Danita Warren and Simon Butt, CEO and President, I'm glad to be with you. First and foremost, to say thank you. We have worked closely together to keep the sector going under the most trying circumstances imaginable. And as your pre-budget submission highlights, you are facing front on many of the big forces shaping our economy. Interrupted supply chains, the changing workforce with labour shortages and changing skills needs, the digitalisation of our economy, the decarbonisation of our economy. And that was happening before COVID, and it's only been accelerating since then. And of course, you have been responding to during this great economic disruption in our lifetime. And we've worked together to save lives and livelihoods throughout. We've saved 40,000 lives. When compared to the death rate from COVID in countries just like Australia. And we've saved thousands, if not millions, of livelihoods as well. We've been taking the difficult but necessary path of balancing our health objectives with our broader societal and economic well-being. And we can all be proud of what we've achieved. I watch your sector closely and I speak regularly with leaders right across it. As Prime Minister and when I was Treasurer, I've always considered the sector to be a barometer of the nation's economic health. Professionally, I actually started my professional life researching, collecting and working in the property building and business sector. So I know the depth and spread of your workforce challenges and how vital it is in every community across Australia. As you know, when you build a house, you need architects, bricklayers, carpenters, concreters, tilers, painters, plumbers, gas fitters, landscapers, and so much more, and you've got to get them all to work together according to a plan. Your sector accounts for over 17% of all businesses and 7% of our economy. Your work, building houses, no, homes, apartments, as well as places of work, buildings and infrastructure and so much more, it's an act of faith in the future. During COVID, you have adapted constantly and you've kept moving and you have been integral to Australia's economic success. We've seen dwelling approvals, new home sales and housing finance bounce back significantly, not just once but on a number of occasions. More detached homes began construction in the year to September 2021 than in any previous period since records began. That's incredible given the challenges that you faced. Construction timeframes are longer than they should be. the availability of land and materials, significant issues there, the workforce gaps that need filling, bricklayers, carpenters, roofers especially. It's why we went so hard with apprenticeship support and job trainer. Our apprenticeship wage subsidies have driven a 27% increase in apprentices and trainees over the past year. Right now, around 220,000 Australians are in trade apprenticeships. That's the highest level since records began in 1963. And Job Trainer, which we're delivering in partnership with the states, is doing heavy lifting with more than 300,000 enrolments from a total of 460,000 places on offer. The Treasurer and I, Josh and I, were determined not to lose a generation of young people from employment and training during COVID. We did not want a generation of lost skills, and we haven't. Australia is coming back. The apprenticeship incentives that we put in place at the start of the pandemic, they were the first wage subsidy we put in place because we didn't want to lose those skills, never to see them return. That would have impeded our economic growth long after the pandemic ended. That was about foresight. It was about understanding the role of training and skills in our workplace. And we took fast and immediate action to prevent those terrible consequences of what the pandemic might have brought otherwise. And as I've moved around the country, I've met so many of these apprentices who have either completed their apprenticeship or are still in them because of that decision at the start of the pandemic. Without it, they would have been forsaken, and I wasn't going to let that happen. Our plans are working. We've made the right calls, particularly on the big ones, on the economy, working to a plan that supported you. We listened very carefully to industry. Heavy lifting of $100 billion in federal government COVID business support. Thousands and thousands of businesses were saved that otherwise would have gone. And we're coming back. Unemployment in December was 4.2%. That's the lowest level it's been in more than 13 years. Our labour force participation rate bounced back to a near record high of 66.1% as workers returned to the labour market. That was a vote of confidence. They were voting with their feet, marching back into our labour force to drive our recovery. Growth is forecast to be at 3.75%, 3.75% this financial year and 3.5% next financial year, up from 1.5% in 2020-2021. We know that Australians have been wise, balance sheets are healthy for households and businesses, cash holdings have increased dramatically, and we've retained our AAA credit rating from all three ratings agencies. We're one of only 9 countries in the world to achieve that. Now, this matters because how you manage money as a government has an impact on inflationary pressures, and the inflationary pressures that can undermine all the work that you're doing, undermine the wages that Australians earn through increases in cost of living. How a government manages the money that is entrusted to them in financial management has a big impact on the weekly grocery bill. It has a big impact on how far those wages that you pay in the sector, people work hard for them, and we want them to go as far as they possibly can. And that means governments being in control of their own spending, in control of their own financial management. And as a government, we've demonstrated that. Budget after budget after budget, investing where we have to, spending on the things that make a big difference, that strengthen our economy, because without a strong economy, you cannot guarantee the essential services in health and education and pensions, disability support, aged care that Australians rely on. Of course, we'll continue to learn and adapt. That's one of the things about our government. We'll continue to support you and the jobs that you create and your own jobs. We'll continue to invest in infrastructure. We'll keep building those important road and rail infrastructure that underpins the growth of our economy. And we'll continue to cut that red tape and make it easier to do business. And we're working particularly hard at a federal level on cutting that red tape in the EPBC Act, which I know has been such a frustration, particularly when you're talking about residential developments in regional areas. I know the vast majority of your members, they're small businesses. Many are sole traders. So we're doing all we can to help you just get on with it. From simplified payments to a uniform scheme for automatically recognising job licences and registrations. There's been a lot of criticism of the National Cabinet, But can I tell you, one of the things we achieved, one of the many things we've achieved, was slashing that red tape around licensing in a matter of weeks. You care about improving regulator performance also. Our Regulator Performance Omnibus Bill will be introduced to the Parliament this session, and we'll also continue to back you through our skills reform agenda. And of course, with our hugely successful home building and first home buyer incentives. Over 300,000 Australians have been directly assisted into home ownership during the past 3 years with programs such as the Home Guarantee Scheme and the Home Builder Scheme. And we've seen a lift in the number of owner-occupier first home buyers rise from 100,000 a year, so get ready for it, 170,000 a year. Now, it hasn't got easier to buy a home in any of our capital cities, and particularly in increasing number of regional areas. Prices have been going up. That's how the market works. But despite that, 300,000 people directly assisted through the targeted, well-designed programs of Home Builder and the Home Guarantee Scheme. I remember the laughter and the scoffing by the Labor Party about Home Builder. At that time, in the middle of 2020, as we stared into the abyss of the pandemic, residential construction was on the edge of a cliff. I remember meeting with Danita. I remember being out there in Googong, and I remember particularly because we were told to get off the lawn of a very proud homeowner who had, as a condition of buying into that estate, I understand, making sure his lawn was growing. And it was a humorous moment, but there was a lot of serious things at stake on that day. And we announced that program. And we stared into that uncertainty together, the government together with the housing industry. And we put in place the Home Builder program. 2 years later, we've seen $30 billion worth of residential construction activity flow. That's what happens when you've got a government who gets it. That's what happens when you've got a government that knows how to work with small and medium-sized businesses and knows what you need to do to shift the dial, to protect the future of that sector, but also to grasp and realise opportunities and build for the future. So throughout a remarkable period, we have worked together to keep our economy strong, and together we have. And I want to thank you for that. Australia's performance has outstripped the performance of most advanced economies in the world through this pandemic. But a strong economy cannot be taken for granted. Strong economic management is more important than ever. And as we go forward to this election this year, there'll be a choice between my government, who has demonstrated our economic management and financial management credentials, and the Labor Party under Anthony Albanese, who just haven't got the experience to do the job. But more importantly than that, our plan, which we have been implementing for our economic recovery, takes us into the future. We have the economic plan to not only just secure Australia's economic recovery, but build for the future well beyond that. There are 5 elements to that plan. Firstly, keeping taxes low and cutting red tape so we can drive investment. Secondly, investing in the infrastructure and skills development that our economy needs to grow. Thirdly, delivering affordable, reliable energy that you need, while at the same time delivering on our emissions reduction targets and net zero by 2050. And we're doing that through technology, not taxes, that just drives up the cost of everything. Fourthly, ensuring Australia realises our ambition to be a top 10 data and digital economy by 2030. And fifthly, securing Australia's sovereign manufacturing capability so we can unlock a new generation of high-wage, high-skill, high-tech jobs. That sovereign capability which manufactures and produces so much of what you put into those homes and provides a more secure supply chain for you and for your customers, and keeping downward pressure on the costs of building that home, which I know you understand is always someone's dream. This isn't just bricks and mortar. This is their life's dream. You know, Australians, they have many great aspirations to raise their kids well, to get them educated, to bring them up to be great people and contributors in our society, to look after their parents, to ensure that they look after themselves and provide for their own retirement. These are great Australian aspirations, but owning your own home is such an ambition of so many Australians. And we've put that more in reach for so many more together. And I'm very proud of what we've done together. At the last election, I made this a priority. And over the course of the last 3 years, we've been delivering. But we've needed your help to do that. And it's our partnership that has achieved it. So thank you for everything you've done for Australians in this extraordinary period. Let's keep working together so that we can keep our economy strong. And together, we will.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Good to hear the Prime Minister mention the important issues to the industry, including skills, supply shortages, infrastructure spending and deregulation. It was also important that the Prime Minister pointed out that the building and construction industry is the barometer of the economy. As we say, a strong building industry means a strong economy, and that has been and remains critical during these uncertain economic times. Our next speaker is the Leader of the Opposition, the Honourable Anthony Albanese MP.
I begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which you're meeting and pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. It's great to be able to chat to the Master Builders Australia Summit yet again, although this time of course virtually. Hopefully we're coming to the end of this period of COVID disruptions and delays, and that we can all be together in the same room again in the future. Once we've put this pandemic behind us, I believe that our best days are ahead of us. There's a bright future within our reach, a bright future that we can shape together. I'm proud to say that I've always seen my role as that of a builder, building the infrastructure that this country needs, building the skills level that will allow Australia to more fully realise our great potential, building the economy, because a strong economy is what makes everything else possible in social and environmental policies. Building relationships and productive partnerships by bringing people together. It's what you know about me. It's how I created Infrastructure Australia, the Urban Policy Forum, and so many other vehicles to do that. Building certainty. We have stood together on common ground so often. You've been bringing people together for more than 130 years. So has the Australian Labor Party. So much comes and goes, but not the NBA. As I've said before, your organisation can always be counted upon to cut to the heart of issues affecting infrastructure policy in this country. And that is policy that has always been very close to my heart. To get an idea of what my approach would be as the Prime Minister, it's worth looking at what I did as the Infrastructure Minister. As Infrastructure Minister, I oversaw the building of 1/3 of the interstate rail freight network. I doubled the roads budget. I built more urban public transport, invested more in those 6 years than had been invested in the previous 107 years. But it wasn't just the big, large stuff. The role also gave me the perfect chance to pursue microeconomic reform. I reduced the number of national transport regulators from 23 down to 3. Before that, separate maritime licences were required across state boundaries. The same rail signals meant different things depending upon where you were, and there were different widths and lengths of heavy vehicles permitted, and even different numbers of cattle allowed on the back of heavy vehicles. It really was the most absurd red tape, and removing it will return a $30 billion efficiency dividend to the economy over 20 years. As Communications Minister, I was supporting the rollout of the National Broadband Network. I said at the time, do it right, do it once, do it with fibre. Gradually, the federal government has come to the reality that fibre, not copper, is the right option for the 21st century. It was pretty obvious to most of us beforehand. I've also fought for better pay and working conditions for workers. I helped to spearhead Australia's response to the global financial crisis. I've done the hard work of building our economy from the bottom up and the inside out. After 25 years in Parliament, I've got a pretty good handle on what gets an economy roaring, unleashing the potential of the Australian people through good jobs, higher pay and smart investments. As you know, one of the things that I've always done is say that there's common interest between employers and employees. That's why unions, as well as employer organisations, have such a critical role to play in building our economy. Common interest, that's what we need more of. Not division and chaos, which is what we're seeing at the moment. My political values come from my origins. I was raised in a council house by my single mum. She was a disability pensioner. Money was pretty tight in our household, so I learnt very early the value of a dollar and how to manage money. It's how we got by on a day-to-day basis. That's why when it comes to thinking about government spending and fiscal policy, I'm cautious. I know that governments have to, just like households, make sure that they get value for money. And I know also that at the moment so many families out there are really struggling to get by. We have wages that simply aren't keeping up with the cost of living. The key to lifting that is productivity. The key to lifting that is making sure that we boost the economy and that we have appropriate policies in place. So if we're in government, you know that my door was always open to you as a minister. You know we had regular engagement, and you know that that's the approach. One of cooperation and working with people is the approach that I would bring as Prime Minister of the country. We'd also have specific policies that will really make a difference to your members, including our Housing Australia Future Fund to support construction in social housing. Good for those who need a roof over their heads, good for getting tradies and builders straight back on the tools, good for your businesses. Our free TAFE plan in areas of skills shortage is also a necessary factor. You know that you're struggling to get people with the skills that are needed to fulfil the requirements which are there in your industry. We'll also have Jobs and Skills Australia, and in government I see your organisation as playing a direct role in it. Jobs and Skills Australia doing for Labor what Infrastructure Australia does for capital. Two organisations bringing together private sector and government expertise to drive productivity in the economy, to drive change, both in terms of where investment goes to across the whole of the infrastructure suite of transport, communications, water and energy, and Jobs and Skills Australia, making sure that we look at, okay, what are the skills that will be needed today, in 5 years, in 10 years, to make sure that we can, one, deliver on what we want to do in terms of building, but secondly, maximise the opportunities for people, whether it be young people doing their first job or people retraining to make sure that they fill those jobs. Now, when he was Prime Minister, Bob Hawke, who mentored me, reinvigorated Australia by bringing people together. That's the spirit that will be at the heart of a Labor government that I lead, working together in collaboration, because that is the business model to drive growth and productivity. I wish you well going forward, and I look forward to working with you up until the next election, but most importantly beyond. I will bring to the leadership, if I have the great honour of leading this country, someone who you know, someone who you've worked with in the past, and someone who you can continue to work with in the future. I want to mobilise our nation so that our best years are ahead of us, particularly arising out of COVID. That's important, and the Master Builders will have an important role in it. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you. It was great to hear Mr Albanese talk about infrastructure, skills, deregulation, and leveraging the benefits of common interest. We were very fortunate to secure both the Prime Minister and the Leader of the Opposition to address this summit. While it would have been fantastic to do this in person, we greatly appreciate the efforts of both leaders in taking the time to film their video messages. Our next speaker is Justin Arter, CEO of Cbus Super, one of our platinum partners. Cbus has an outstanding record of returns for its members and understanding the needs of its members working in the building and construction industry, particularly in the area of insurance. Before we hear from Justin, here is a message from Cbus.
Right now, at Cbus, we're building for the future, working with partners like the NBA to help rebuild the strength of the economy. We're investing in property and major new projects across Australia to help create thousands of jobs. And with a strong foundation of long-term performance, building a secure and rewarding retirement for all of us.
Thank you to Master Builders Australia for the opportunity to address you all today. I'd like to acknowledge Danita Warren, our newly appointed Deputy Chair, and all of the Master Builders directors who work tirelessly for Cbus members across the country. We live in some unprecedented times. Today, I want to share some context as to how Cbus approaches the world we live in and why I have such strong faith in our ability to deliver strong retirement outcomes for our members. Cbus was founded in 1984, and our fund became the catalyst for the compulsory and universal superannuation that Australia enjoys today. A lot has happened in the 38 years since our founding. There was the Black Monday crash in the late 80s. The Cold War ended. There was an Asian financial crisis and a global tech bubble. The world was shaken by the events of September 11. Irrational exuberance in the subprime mortgage market led to the global financial crisis. This was followed by a multi-year European debt crisis, Brexit, and a US-China trade war. And that's not to mention 2 Iraq wars, 2 major tsunamis, earthquakes, firestorms and floods. Now we're in the 3rd year of a global pandemic, the likes of which hasn't been seen for a century. Despite all these challenges, as at the end of last financial year, Cbus has returned 9.25% average per year since inception. Let's put that in some context. Back in '84, the Mitsubishi Nimbus was Wheels Car of the Year. Described as 4 cars in one and great for families, it retailed for about $12,000. If you invested that $12,000 in Cbus inception, it'd be worth over $330,000 at the end of last financial year, including investment fees, tax and trustee operating costs. And that's without any further contributions. I mention this because today I want to speak with you about some major trends I see that makes me optimistic about the future. I'll speak about why I'm optimistic about the future of Cbus, the future of super, and the future of our nation. We live in uncertain times, and as we begin 2022, we've seen a high level of volatility in markets, both here and abroad. Volatility and uncertainty aren't new, as the history of Cbus has shown us. The question is, how do you prepare for it? How do you manage it? And how do you choose where to put your focus? When I spoke to you last year, I reported that Cbus had been one of only a handful of funds that produced a positive return for the 2020 year, judging our default or MySuper product against those of other super funds. I'm pleased to be able to update that last year we returned a fund record 19.34% for the financial year. These 2 outstanding results are testament to the strategy that our fund put in place 5 years ago to ensure we continued to build on the success of the fund's first few decades. We set ourselves a challenge to bring management of 40% of our assets in-house by 25, and we're only a hair's breadth away from reaching that goal right now. There are 2 important outcomes for members from this move. First, we've made significant cost savings that flow through to member accounts. Since 2017, our investment costs have fallen 41%, which has provided a cumulative benefit to members of $410 million over that 4-year period. In the last financial year, 21, we saved members $170 million in investment costs, and our MySuper investment fees are now sitting at 51 basis points, down 9.2% from the previous year. These are significant savings that enhance our outstanding returns. Second, our investment staff are investing in and monitoring the markets every day, and this gives our fund huge insights into what's happening. At the height of COVID-19, this insight proved invaluable. Our internal team enabled us to manage daily cash flows and liquidity even while the early release scheme was happening, ensuring we didn't have to sell assets and actually had funds at hand to take advantage of investment opportunities as they arose at that time. As the leading super fund for the building and construction industry, we're proud to invest back into the sector and the economy, and it's a key part of the fund's DNA. Cbus Super now has over $5 billion invested in property in Australia across 157 assets, including our recent purchase of a third of the Jandakot Airport precinct in Perth. Over $3 billion is now invested across 20 Australian infrastructure assets in our portfolio. Our development arm, Cbus Property, delivered a strong return of 11.4% to members in the year ended June 21, continuing its history of strong returns, being an average of just over 15% since inception in 06. Cbus Property's outstanding success reflects its determination to build some of Australia's highest quality developments. Through 21, construction has been continuing at 443 Queen Street, Brisbane, the Langston Epping in Sydney's northwest, 111 and 121 Castlereagh in Sydney's CBD, 17 Spring Street in Melbourne's CBD, and 83 Pirie Street in Adelaide. In October last year, Cbus Property expanded into the retail space. Together with UniSuper, we announced its acquisition of 2 major regional shopping centres as a new partner in the AMP Capital Retail Trust. That trust now owns 50% of the Macquarie Shopping Centre in North Ryde, New South Wales, and 100% of Pacific Fair Shopping Centre in Broadbeach on the Gold Coast in Queensland. Both shopping centres fall within the top 15 retail centres in Australia. Cbus Property, together with AMP Capital and UniSuper, consolidated its retail ownership, acquiring the remaining 20% of Pacific Fair in December 21. Cbus Property's residential projects experienced strong demand in 21, with 3 luxury residences of the Penthouse Collection at 111 Castlereagh in Sydney selling for $66 million, and 2 whole-floor residences at 17 Spring in Melbourne CBD selling for $25 million. New residential project announcements include Como Terraces in South Yarra in conjunction with Sterling Global, and another one in North Sydney. New commercial project announcements include the lodgement of a new development application for a $1 billion office tower at 435 Bourke Street in Melbourne's CBD. Architecturally designed by the multi-award winning Bates Smart, the reinvigorated submission, to be known as 435 Bourke, will set a new benchmark for sustainable office development and design, being one of the first office towers in the world to feature a solar skin facade. It's this focus on innovation that has led Cbus Property performing globally exceptionally well in the annual Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark Survey, ranking among the top 1% of all participants. Another demonstration of our commitment to the building and construction industry is our Insurance for Members, one of the nation's largest group insurance policies. I've spoken to you before about Cbus's success in lobbying for a dangerous occupations exemption to legislative changes regarding insurance. This exemption has proved to be crucial for Cbus members and their families. Between April 20 and 31 December 2021, a total of 156 claims have been lodged, assessed, approved and paid to these members of their families, totalling over $19 million. Without the exemption, this figure would have been zero. Over $6.5 million, or about a third, were paid to members who are in their teenagers or their 20s. Just over 5.7, almost another third, were paid to members who are in their 30s, and almost 2/3 of benefits paid were for members aged under 39 years. Cbus's advocacy members in the insurance space has ensured that these members and their families haven't been abandoned when injured in the early stages of their careers. July this year is the 30th anniversary of super becoming universal and compulsory. At that point, total super assets in Australia were estimated to be $148 billion. Today, total assets top $3 trillion. Over those 30 years, super has provided an increasing number of Australia's added dignity, security and comfort in retirement. But the system is still young in financial terms. For context, our investment teams today are investing for apprentices who won't retire for another 4 or 5 decades. The first workers to receive compulsory super still have some time in the market until retirement. Even without the system having fully matured yet, super is a resounding success. And some significant changes within the super industry are cementing the foundation for the system to be the absolute best in the world. The Hayne Royal Commission shone a light on fee for no service in the for-profit super sector and sparked an influx of new members to profit-to-member funds like Cbus. The new performance tests are giving cause to smaller funds to consider how they can compete in a future where scale delivers the best investments at low costs to members. And funds like Cbus are undertaking mergers to give members access to greater economies of scale and the savings that offers. In April, we'll finalise our merger with Media Super. And before Christmas, we announced that we've entered due diligence with energy fund EISS. And we remain keen on engaging in the merger space. The industry consolidation that we're seeing is a good thing for members, a good thing for the industry, and a great outcome for the country. Having a giant pool of national savings through super is a competitive economic advantage for our nation. That advantage will only grow as savings grow, and larger funds like Cbus are able to deploy even more patient capital into sectors of our economy, like infrastructure and the built environment, that need long-term investment. Cbus has invested strongly in the nation's economy during the pandemic and will continue to support the national economic recovery. I mentioned earlier our investments in property and infrastructure, a key focus for the fund. Cbus, because of our scale, has been able to play a key role in recapitalising Australian businesses through equity raisings and will continue to do more. My sincere hope for the coming years is that funds like Cbus have enough policy certainty to play the best role that we can in the recovery. There's a great opportunity, irrespective of the outcome of this year's election, for funds like Cbus to partner with industry and government to supercharge Australia's economic growth. There are already successful models for this type of partnership. The work that Cbus has done with the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation on social and affordable housing shows what can be achieved by government, super and industry working together to fund new housing builds. As a CEO, I value partnership and collaboration. I appreciate the role that Danita, Master Builders Australia and all the MBA branches across Australia have contributed to our fund's success, and I look forward to what we can achieve together over the coming years.
Thanks, Justin. Cbus is certainly going strong with its returns and growth, and good to see Cbus property going from strength to strength. Before we return to our guest speakers, we would like to thank one of our major partners, InfraBuild Reinforcing. We not only appreciate their 25-year relationship with Master Builders Australia, but also the consultation between the two organisations as the industry tackles supply shortages. Let's hear from InfraBuild.
There is only one. It helps us sleep soundly at night and keeps our homes strong, stable and safe, helping to build roads, schools and hospitals, making our cities and towns livable and prosperous. It's steel, reinforcing steel. It's the infrastructure our country is built on. It inspires us to challenge the notion of what is possible, how we plan, how we build, how we deliver. Because as much as we deal in steel, we also deal in futures. Yours, ours, Australia's. InfraBuild Construction Solutions.
Housing is always front and centre of economic debate in Australia, and no doubt will be so during the upcoming federal election campaign. So to see how the two major parties square up on housing policies, let's hear from the Housing Minister and the Shadow Minister. First up, the Minister for Housing and Assistant Treasurer, the Honourable Michael Sukkar, MP.
It's my pleasure to speak today at the Master Builders Association Leaders Summit. As we enter our third year of COVID, the relationship between the government and the construction industry is as important and as strong as ever. I remember a year ago when I gave this address that I thanked Danita, Alex and Ben for their hard work during the pandemic. The on-the-ground feedback that the MBA had provided government was invaluable, particularly in a time of crisis. But now we're entering the recovery stage. As it was during the peak of the pandemic, the construction industry will be vital to our economic recovery. So if you receive phone calls from Danita, Ben or Alex, it's likely that it's because we've asked for your feedback. So please answer their calls. As you know, the MBA can provide insights to the government like no other. And for that, I thank you all for joining such an effective organisation. And in doing so, I'd also like to acknowledge the Prime Minister who spoke earlier today. I'm sure I'm echoing the thoughts of many today. To have a Prime Minister that understands the significant contribution of the construction industry and the power of the Australian dream to own their own patch of land has meant that the industry has been a key driver of the economy when other industries were shut down. Fortunately, we've had a PM that saw a $2.8 billion investment into HomeBuilder as good value for money. This is because he recognised the power of the industry in saving jobs, driving economic activity, and giving Australians the confidence to purchase a home of their own. But the PM also understood the value of the construction industry and the housing industry long before the pandemic. When we won the 2019 election, the PM gave me the honour of serving as the Minister for Housing, but also as the Assistant Treasurer. Housing was seen as an economic portfolio, not a social services portfolio. And housing as an asset class, as you know, is worth $9.1 trillion. And at $9.1 trillion, Australia's residential property is worth more than the GDP of every country on earth other than the US and China. It's also more than 4 times the size of Australia's own GDP. Residential real estate's now worth 28% more than the estimated value of superannuation, the ASX, and commercial real estate combined. So the PM has long recognised that housing and construction is fundamental to the economy, and that's why HomeBuilder was a no-brainer to him. But for me, I'd like to tell you the story of how HomeBuilder came about. I remember meeting with Danita and her counterparts. I was sitting at my desk and reflected on their warnings. 500,000 jobs at risk, hitting a valley of death, at least a 30% drop in new home sales. I was also reflecting on the options provided to me by those not at risk of losing their jobs. Invest in social housing or in public infrastructure, among other options. And make no mistake, those projects would provide an economic benefit, but they had a lead time of at least 12 months. 12 months we couldn't afford to waste. 12 months of job losses that I could not accept. I also reflected on my own family and my own parents working in small business and dealing with the constant challenges faced by small business and indeed the recession of the early 1990s. My parents, including my father, who was a migrant who came to Australia at the age of 18, were a very typical small business couple. They established their first business, worked in it together, and had a succession of businesses throughout my childhood. So as I sat at my desk following my meeting with Danita, I thought about my own experiences, my own parents, and their small business challenges. And it was in that context that I thought of how could I design a policy that helped small business owners like them? How do I help the 410,000 businesses in the construction industry, of which 98% are small businesses with less than 20 employees? And I reflected again on my own childhood and how many children today would be seeing their parents stressed, worrying about how they were going to meet the wages for the next month or the costs for the next month. That's why we decided HomeBuilder was the best course of action. And I've shared with this forum my thinking behind the design. We needed to create a grant that people would need to act quickly to access. Fear of missing out, as those younger than me call it. Only make it available to new homes to ensure that construction jobs were guarded. And most importantly, do it safely so we avoid the mistakes of previous governments and we can all think back to pink bats. But there's an aspect of HomeBuilder design that I haven't shared before. We allowed the renovations of $150,000 to be eligible for the HomeBuilder grant. The opposition leader said the home builder grant would fund gold taps and pearl baths and that no one could afford a renovation. We know this is not true. But for me, in including those substantial renovations in home builder, I was also thinking of the sole traders and SMEs in the construction industry. They needed to be included. I needed to design a policy that would not just deliver confidence for people to purchase a new home in Melbourne and Sydney or Perth or throughout the country, but I needed a policy that would ensure that the SME tiling business in Armstrong Creek or the painter in Caboolture would also have work on those smaller scale reservations. And we now see the record of home builder. 137,000 projects that's delivering more than $30 billion in direct economic support for our country and more than $120 billion of broader economic support. Home builder, of course, though, before we had those statistics, was met with criticism. But I held my breath, and when you design policies based on principles you know to be true, that is that construction is a key driver of economic activity, that SMEs will fight with everything they have, that they don't want to be supported by government, they want to support themselves, that ultimately it would be a success. And most importantly, even in the most challenging circumstances, the Australian dream to own your own home we knew would always be strong. And fortunately, these principles meant I didn't have to hold my breath for long. Home builder was a success, and now even the most trenchant critics of home builder begrudgingly admit it was a great success. Last year when I addressed you in this forum, I said that we had 75,000 applications when we only expected 27,000. Today, as I said, we're now at 137,000 applications, 4 times more than I had imagined. That just makes me, as a housing minister, 4 times happier. And it means the economic benefits to our country are 4 times greater. But what means the most to me are the small vignettes, meeting Brooke and Matt in Geelong and the tradies that built Brooke and Matt's first home. Home Builder was a grant that meant the difference for Brooke and Matt in buying their home. Home Builder meant that Brooke and Matt's decision kept people in jobs as well, the engineer, the carpenter, the roofer, the many others. Because the government doesn't create jobs. We just give confidence to the Brookes and the Matts of the world to take the plunge into their first home. And we give confidence to small business owners that their work is valued and the late nights dedicated to their businesses are recognised. Home Builder wasn't a policy I was planning on bringing forward when I accepted the housing portfolio in 2019, though, I might add. But it's one that worked. And I also recognise that many of you are dealing with the challenges of this success, including the broader supply chain challenges that all industries are facing during COVID. For this reason, Home Builder has never been set and forget. That's why Danita and her team have been so valuable to help us understand where challenges might be required to be dealt with, such as extending the construction commencement timeline. Home Builder was a reaction to a situation, but we had and still have many plans for the housing and construction sector. Plans that have been in place since we came to government in 2019. The PM and I established the National Housing Finance and Investment Corporation. And to date, the Morrison government's NIFIC has provided low-cost finance to support 14,000 social and affordable homes, even during COVID. Furthermore, it supported more than 6,500 new market affordable and social homes through our $1 billion infrastructure facility that funds housing enabling infrastructure. In December, the PM and I announced a further $500 million of low-cost financing to support an additional 1,500 dwellings. This is in addition to the $9.3 billion we're expecting to spend on improving housing and homelessness outcomes this financial year, including the $1.6 billion that we give directly to the states. This is because we understand that the supply of homes, whether they be social, affordable or market, is ultimately the key to affordability. but the demand for social and affordable housing is significant. That's why it can't be solved by government alone. That's why I'm currently amending the investment mandate guiding NIFIC to crowd in private sector investment. Affordable housing as an asset class is what infrastructure assets were 20 years ago. A dependable investment with risk-adjusted returns that have the potential to attract institutional investors. Growing affordable housing as an asset class will mean homes for our most vulnerable, jobs for those in the construction sector, and greater supply to underpin housing affordability. Our confidence in these policies and the investment opportunities into affordable housing is not unfounded. An independent review of NIFIC in 2021 determined that it was a singularly significant and successful intervention by the Commonwealth. But what I'm most proud of is our home guarantee schemes that are also operated by NIFIC. We took to the 2019 election the first home loan deposit scheme, and between then and now, more than 60,000 Australians have been helped on their journey to home ownership. In last year's budget, we began to consider policies that are beyond the pandemic, and we reflected on the retirement income review that found home ownership was a key to a comfortable retirement. Again, late one night, I was reflecting on the challenges of non-first home buyers who've fallen out of home ownership. Our policies and those at a state level are all targeted to first home buyers, but these aren't the only Australians that need support to get into home ownership. As such, the Family Home Guarantee was born, and this allowed single parents to purchase a home with a deposit of as little as 2%. This policy recognises the importance of a home of your own, growing up with friends and building relationships within a stable community. And just last week, I met Shawani, a person who has used the Family Home Guarantee. Shawani had fled a situation of domestic violence. Shawani and her child Neil had to leave everything behind, including their family home. And all Shawani wanted to do was to provide Neil with a place to grow up. And in his words, a place where he could train to become a neurosurgeon one day, a very ambitious young boy. After finding out about the Family Home Guarantee in August, Shawani has now settled into her own home, and she did that by November. In meeting Shawani, she also told me that she's paying less in mortgage repayments than she was paying in rent, and the Family Home Guarantee was the difference to get her into her home. So supporting home ownership is not just a nice thing to do for the Brooks, the Matts, the Shawanis and Neils of the world. Importantly, it supports SMEs, it supports communities, and it grows the economy. To date, the Morrison government has supported more than 300,000 people on their home ownership journey in just 3 years. First home buyers are at their highest levels in nearly 15 years. Dwelling approvals have broken every record since records began. To the Morrison government, home ownership and the SMEs that make up the construction industry will always be our priority. In a few short months, the Brooks and the Matts and the Shawanis will be voting. The mums and dads running SMEs, working late at night under dim lights, will be voting. But elections aren't why we prioritise construction and home ownership. Elections give us the community's blessing to continue supporting the Australian dream of home ownership and the mums and dads running their small businesses. I'm excited to take this platform to the election because the Morrison government has proven what we can do in a pandemic. Wait until you see what we can do in a recovery. But for that, we stand by you as the construction industry and the industry that got us through the pandemic. And the industry will lead our recovery. I'm very confident of that. So can I thank you all for your time today? Can I thank the Master Builders Association for the wonderful advice you've provided me over the past 3 years. We've achieved so much together, and can I thank all of the members of the MBA for the outstanding work you've done, as I said, in leading Australia's economic recovery, and we are very confident that will continue for a long time into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. We appreciate your commitment to the housing sector during the height of COVID and appreciate your comments as to what the key issues are affecting the industry, including the fact we are the key driver of the economy, jobs, small business, but acknowledging there are also current supply stresses and the encouragement of private investment in social housing. We again thank the Minister for his backing of the Home Builder Grant. We would now like to welcome the Honourable Jason Clare MP, Shadow Minister for Housing and Social Homelessness.
G'day and thanks for the invitation to speak to you today. There's now less than 100 days until Australians decide who their next government will be. And one of the big issues in this election will be the cost of housing. Buying a home is the biggest and the most important investment that most of us will ever make. And the fact is, it's getting harder. In the last 12 months, house prices have jumped by an incredible 25%. In a lot of places, it's jumped by a lot more than that. Here's just a few examples. In Wombrel and Terrigal on the central coast of New South Wales, the cost of the average home has jumped by a whopping 45% in the last year. In Kiama on the south coast, prices have jumped by 35.7%. In Cessnock in the Hunter, they've jumped by 33.3%. And in Torquay in Victoria, they've jumped by 34.5%. In Launceston in Tassie, the cost of the average home has increased by over 40% in the last 12 months. Now, if you already own a place, that's great. Your home has probably made more money last year than you did. But if you're trying to buy, it's now harder than ever before. Remember the good old days when the only bug we were worried about was Y2K? Back then, the average home cost about 4 times the average income. Now it's about double that. And not surprisingly, the people that this has hit the hardest are people on lower incomes. Young people on lower incomes in particular. Back when I was a kid and Bob Hawke was the Prime Minister, 60% of young Aussies on lower incomes owned their own home. 60%. Now, that number is less than 30%. That's a massive change for the worse. And the real impact of that will only really be felt decades from now when these young people retire and they're still renting. The government points to the programs they've run that have helped people into their first homes. But remember this, Home Builder is temporary. The government's home guarantee schemes are a good idea and we support them. They can help to eliminate thousands of dollars in mortgage insurance. But if we really want more Australians to live in a home that they own, there's a lot more that we still need to do. At last year's Leaders Summit, I said we need a national housing and homelessness plan that is more ambitious than just a response to the pandemic and that lasts longer than just 12 months. A plan that helps more Australians buy a home, helps Australians who rent, and helps put a roof over the head of more Australians. At the Labor National Conference in March last year, this became party policy. This is something that everyone has been asking for, from Master Builders Australia to the HIA to the Real Estate Institute, right through to National Shelter and Homelessness Australia. And if we win the next election, we will do it. It'll look at things like land use planning and land supply. As you know, if we can make improvements here, we can boost productivity and improve housing affordability. It'll also look at ways to encourage the private sector to build more affordable housing and the desperate need to build more homes for homeless Aussies. We all know how much the cost of buying a home has gone up. We get told about it on the news almost every second night. But what if you rent? It doesn't make the headlines, but this is the biggest bill that millions of Aussies pay every week. And in the last 12 months, it's gone through the roof. The Prime Minister was asked the other day how much a litre of petrol costs. He should have been asked how much rent has gone up. Have a think about this. The jump in the cost of petrol in the last few months means that the average family with an average car is now paying about $900 a year extra for petrol than they were last year. But if that same family is renting, their rent has probably gone up by about double that. In some places even more. In Cairns, the average rent has gone up by over $2,000. In Burnie, the average rent is now $2,500 more than it was this time last year. In Launceston, it's $3,000 more than it was last year. In North Nowra, not far from here on the south coast, it's gone up by more than $3,000. And on the Central Coast, the average rent is now $3,600 more this year than it was last year. This is the coalface of the cost of living debate that politicians are having in this place right now. The places I mentioned, they're the sorts of places that will determine who wins the election in a few months' time. And the people who live there are hurting. But it's not just them, because this is happening everywhere. This is a photograph from the Cairns Post, from a story a couple of months ago. And what it shows is a mum, a dad, a 13-year-old daughter and their dog sitting in the boot of their car on the edge of the Captain Cook Highway with a sign that says wanted, 2-bed rental, small family plus dog. Then it's got their mobile phone number there. I think that shows you just how desperate and dire things are. These aren't backpackers looking to hitchhike up and down the coast, trying to find an affordable place to rent. This is a mum and a dad, a daughter and a dog trying to find a place to live. I've seen other stories from Lake Macquarie where a bloke has had to hire a car to sleep in. Hiring a car to sleep in. How does that happen? Hiring a car because you can't find an affordable place to rent. Saw another story last year in the Newcastle Herald about a young woman called Chloe. She's 24. Here's the photo from the story. Chloe is a nurse at a local hospital in the Hunter, and she's been sleeping in her car as well. How does that happen? North of Newcastle, a bit further up the Pacific Highway, up in Coffs Harbour last year, I heard a story about a place that was up for rent where 50 people turned up to have a look. And the person who eventually got the lease had to pay the rent 12 months in advance. And that's not the worst part. She had to take out a personal loan just to do it. A couple of 100 kilometres further up the highway at Byron Bay, I heard this story. Byron Bay is a place where you think there's a lot of affluence, a lot of wealthy people. There's a lot of people that are struggling as well. And there isn't a women's refuge in town. I was told there that the local police commander thinks there are 400 women and kids sleeping in cars around the town. And the charities in all of these places tell me that they're now seeing as many as 3 times the number of people coming in for help that they were 12 months ago. That's Australia at the moment. Remember that when the Treasurer rattles off the statistics about the economy. There are more homeless Aussies today than ever before. And that alone should tell you that there is something seriously wrong here. There are lots of things that we need to do if we want to fix this, but one of them, the most obvious, is building more housing, building more affordable housing and building more social housing. And if we win the next election, we'll do that. We'll set up a $10 billion fund called the Housing Australia Future Fund. It'll be run by the Future Fund Board of Guardians, and the dividends it produces will fund the construction of social and affordable housing. In its first 5 years, it'll build 30,000 social and affordable homes. 4,000 of those will be for women and kids fleeing domestic violence. 10,000 will be affordable homes for key workers like nurses, cleaners and aged care workers. It's the sort of thing the federal government should do. It's good social policy. It's also good economic policy. This is a fund that will make money, create jobs, build homes and change lives. There aren't many policies, in this place at least, that get the support of everyone from the Real Estate Institute and the Property Council right through to the groups that represent homeless Aussies. But this one has. And I'm particularly grateful for your support. When Albo announced it in the budget reply last year, Danita said, and I quote, "Last year, when the country was in the grip of the pandemic and the economy was locked down, Master Builders, in conjunction with the CFMEU, called for a $10 billion social housing stimulus fund. The opposition leader and the Shadow Minister for Housing and Homelessness have listened. We applaud the opposition's $10 billion social and affordable housing fund." And 2 weeks ago, a dream team of 9 different housing organisations, including Master Builders, the group badged as the National Affordable Housing Alliance, put out this report, which calls on the federal government to do 4 things to boost the construction of affordable housing. And one of those is a housing future fund. If we win the election, it will happen. As I said earlier, the election is now less than 100 days away. We are in the hunt, we're competitive, we're united, and we're full of energy and ideas. I want to take this opportunity, though, to thank you, Danita, to thank you for everything that you have done to help me over the last 3 years. All the tips, all the advice, I really do appreciate it. It has helped me a lot. And if Labor is fortunate enough to win the election, I'm really looking forward to working with you and all members of the MBA, working together to build more housing and working together to help build a better future for all Australians. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Shadow Minister. Glad you touched on the issues of housing affordability, of your national housing plan that will look at things like planning, land supply, and private investment in social housing. We take this opportunity to again applaud the ALP for their social and affordable housing future fund, as mentioned by the Shadow Minister. I'd now like to introduce the CEO of our new Platinum partner, MYOB, Mr. Greg Ellis. We have been concerned that the low level of digitisation of the building and construction industry is adversely impacting on productivity improvements in our industry. So our partnership with MYOB enables us to concentrate in finding more effective solutions to boost take-up in our industry. Let's hear from Greg.
If you run a small business, then you know there are 2 very different kinds of busyness. Busy and busy. There's nothing worse than mind-whirring, wheel-spinning, bad busy. But sometimes you're busy, making waves, smashing targets, good busy. Easily automate your way to financial freedom with the all-in-one online accounting solution MYOB. Get good busy with MYOB today.
Hello everyone. MYOB is fortunate to support Master Builders Australia's annual National Leaders Summit for 2022. I want to thank Danita and the MBA for inviting me to address you today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we all meet and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples here today. The last 2 years have served as an important reminder of the building and construction industry's essential role in Australia. We saw the sector persevere through tough local lockdowns and supply shortages. We saw business owners and workers make sure our infrastructure kept ticking and housing kept pace with demand, all while taking on significant changes to their daily lives and routines. In our role as a business management platform serving a great many construction businesses from big to small, MYOB data tells us 2020 was hard on the sector. And despite a very tough 2021, the sector pushed through well. Over the last 12 months, the industry has driven towards a steady recovery and cash deposits are returning to good health. This is a great demonstration of the resilience of Australia's construction companies. Recovery is encouraging. But the business landscape is unrecognisable compared to 2 years ago. What it takes to remain relevant has changed, and the only way forward for the sector is digital adoption. The importance of going digital was a key takeout of the pandemic. Having an online presence kept businesses going when they couldn't see their customers face to face. Adoption and understanding of the benefits of digital tools leapt forward a couple of years in a couple of weeks, thanks to the mass consumer adoption. One of our focus areas is ensuring SMEs don't now pull back and feel they've done enough. If they have a website or social media page, it's not enough. We know that SMEs who digitise their business processes, being that inventory management, supply chain management or compliance, are 50% more likely to grow revenue than compared to those that don't. They improve accuracy, remove double handling and make high-touch office work more effective. The opportunity is not in the light application of digital tools, it's all in full connectivity to make better commercial decisions for the business. Compared to other sectors, the penetration of digital tools is low in the construction sector. Our January 2022 Business Monitor survey found that only 13% of SMEs in Australia's construction sector moved more of their business online because of the pandemic, compared to 32% in retail and hospitality. 43% of construction businesses have no social media or website presence. 63% do not use digital tools for compliance, and 43% have no digital solution to submit their tax. MYOB modelling shows 1 in 5 small businesses in the construction sector, around 80,000 businesses, have no or very low digital engagement tools. Our modelling also shows that if we were to digitise this cohort of businesses, it would provide an ROI of 23 to 1 to Australia's economy, a powerful addition to this sector's already generous contribution to GDP. The cost of inaction in face of what is now the modern way of doing business could mean a 20% reduction in that contribution in sector employment and livelihoods. This is a heavy cost for Australia to wear. So what's the answer? Work is already being done to move the dial on the digitisation of Australia's SMEs. We are supporters of the federal government's digital compliance agenda and the role Single Touch Payroll played in bringing many previously undigitised businesses online. Equally, the federal government is taking e-invoicing seriously, and we are encouraged by the priority placed on enabling mass adoption of this practice. I believe e-invoicing is one of the most effective levers we have to digitise SMEs in a way that brings material benefit to their cash flow. Where we now need to focus on the 1 in 5 undigitised SMEs, and we see that in 2 key areas of opportunity. The first is education. MYOB Business Monitor data shows 22% of construction-based SMEs do not understand how digital tools will help their business. Access to practical advice on adoption of digital for growth needs to be accessible for every small business owner in Australia. Industry has a big role to play, and we're pleased to be working alongside Master Builders Australia to explore solutions in this space. Secondly, it's access. 28% of the construction-based SMEs say an incentive would help them overcome the cost barriers of digitising their businesses. Existing tax measures stop short of incenting digital take-up. So we recommend a temporary full or majority support for the cost outlay of digital business management tools. The economy can benefit greatly if they target this incentive at sectors with the greatest need and who'll have the most positive economic impact, like construction. With 1 in 10 working Australians employed by the building and construction sector, a lot is riding on this sector. MYOB congratulates and thanks the sector and its people for their tireless work and contributions to the national success. We look forward to supporting the industry in this next phase of growth and opportunity.
Thank you, Greg. As you heard, it is so incredibly important that we not only look after the technical side of building businesses, but also business management of a business. Greg quite rightly highlighted the importance of adoption and implementation of digital tools for productivity improvements, and how we as an industry are not taking up those opportunities to build on our returns. Before we start the last tranche of speakers, we cannot forget our third platinum partner, Toyota Australia. Members of master builders around the country can access Gold Fleet discounts off the Toyota range. So let's hear from Toyota.
You don't give in. You don't give up. You push on when most would have pushed off. You lend a hand, whether a hand was asked for or not. It's called Aussie Spirit for good reason, because it takes spirit to get through times like these. Lucky you've got it in spades. It's what inspires us to be by your side to help. Together we'll get through this. We always do. Search Toyota, here to help.
We've heard throughout this summit that building and construction is central to economic activity. So let's hear from two speakers on what role the industry can play beyond the issues already canvassed today. First up is the Minister for Defence Industries. While not a massive funding contributor to the commercial and civil construction industry, the Defence Estates has led the way in improving federal government procurement practices, particularly in local capability. Here is the Minister, the Honourable Melissa Price, MP.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to begin by acknowledging the outstanding efforts of Master Builders Australia in supporting its members throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. I would also like to thank Danita Warne for her ongoing support, particularly over the past 3 years. The Defence Estate footprint across the nation is immense. 70 major bases, 400 properties and 30,000 structures across 2.8 million hectares of land. Defence's estate and infrastructure supports responses to national crises and regional disasters. During the initial phases of the pandemic, Defence infrastructure facilitated the swift mobilisation of ADF personnel right across the nation. I particularly want to acknowledge every defence contractor, from the largest commercial builders to the smallest subcontractors. You have overcome the challenges of the past 2 years to deliver the infrastructure that Defence needs, and for that I am very grateful. The Morrison government is investing $270 billion in a generational uplift of our defence capability to deliver the equipment and infrastructure our Defence Force needs to respond to our evolving strategic environment. To deliver this, we need a stronger sovereign defence industry with expertise across our country, from the cities to the regions, and that is where the members of the MBA come into play. Your skills, expertise and commitment to supporting the ADF ensures that the bases that house and support the training of the ADF are truly world-class. We can't deliver these capabilities without you, and our 5 pillars approach is delivering results by identifying and removing the barriers that are preventing Australia's small and medium enterprises from getting a fair go when vying for defence work. Our defence policy for industry participation is also helping to strengthen local capacity where it is needed. It is allowing smaller contractors and subcontractors to win defence-related construction work in their local communities. This means more locals can live and work in their communities, generating economic growth and opportunities right around Australia. Under this policy, the tenderers for all defence construction projects worth more than $7.5 million are required to submit a local industry capability plan. These are real, living plans that hold tenderers to account, and they are delivering for local contractors. Prior to the implementation of the policy, local industry engagement on defence construction projects averaged around 60 to 65%. Now it's increased to about 80%. In fact, to date, 80% of subcontracts worth a total value of approximately $3.2 billion have been awarded to local industry across all defence construction projects. But I know we can do better, and we are. To give you just one example, at RAF Base Tyndall in the Northern Territory, a $1.1 billion redevelopment is underway to build the United States Force Posture Initiative Airfield Works. The project has exceeded its local industry engagement target. Instead of 70%, so far 90% of subcontract packages have been awarded to local industry, with a total value of almost $350 million. In the Hunter region, late last year, I announced a $164.9 million contract to deliver major airfield works at RAF Base Williamtown and Newcastle Airport. This contract is estimated to support about 300 jobs with an average of about 130 personnel per day. Importantly, Downer EDI Works will target local businesses to deliver at least 75% of the total contract value as part of its local industry capability plan. In my home state of WA, a joint venture between Perth-based companies Duratec and Urtec secured a $52 million contract to lead an extension and upgrade of the HMAS Stirling Oxley Wharf to service a growing naval fleet. The Oxley Wharf project is part of a $2.1 billion program to deliver maritime and landside facilities for our new naval assets. And critically, for local businesses and communities, businesses within 50 kilometres of HMAS Stirling are expected to win 93% of all subcontract packages to maximise opportunities for local industry. To support these efforts, I launched the Office of Defence Industry Support, known as ODIS, late last year. It is the new one-stop shop for small and medium enterprises doing business with defence. ODIS will help businesses to enter or expand their footprint in the defence market. It will function as a marketplace for defence to seek and find local Australian solutions to capability problems. As the Minister for Defence Industry, I've had the privilege of seeing many of defence bases, training areas, ports, wharfs, air bases and other facilities right across the country. During my visits, I've seen the fine work of Australian businesses and the commitment and pride of the tradies and professionals who help deliver the fabric of our nation's defence force. Australia is best served when defence and industry have the strongest of partnerships. Thank you to the MBA for your partnership in helping us to build the best quality defence estate for our men and women in uniform.
Thank you, Minister. We appreciate that you called out the assistance of contractors in meeting the demands of defence during the bushfires and COVID, and the longer-term role of our industry in building defence capability.
The Office of the Federal Safety Commissioner has helped shape the safety culture of Australia's building and construction industry. Since 2006, the Office of the Federal Safety Commissioner promotes best practice. We work with head contractors on Commonwealth-funded building projects to make sure they use a systems-based approach to safety. With over 450 companies accredited by the Federal Safety Commissioner working in civil, commercial and residential construction, we work with industry for continual improvement in safety. Accredited companies experience lower injury rates on site and consequently pay less in workers' compensation insurance premiums. If you are bidding to become a head contractor on Commonwealth-funded building work, please visit our website or talk to us about becoming accredited.
And our final speaker for today, the Honourable Andrew Leigh MP. He's the Shadow Assistant Minister for Treasury. Thank you, Andrew.
Can I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, the Ngunnawal people, on whose lands I'm speaking to you from today. Dara Nuna, Dara Ngunnawal, Yungu, Nalamanyan, Dunimanyan, Ngunnawal Wari, Dara Wari, Dindi, Wangaralin Jinyin, and acknowledge any Indigenous people who are part of today's event. My grandfather, Rolly Stebbins, was born in a tent in 1922. His father was a World War I veteran with post-traumatic stress disorder, and Rolly had a pretty tough upbringing. He left school at the age of 14 and worked odd jobs to support the family. When World War II broke out, his two best mates were allowed to enlist underage by their parents. Rolly's parents said no, and both his mates were killed. During the war, Rolly worked as a boilermaker. It was tough times, but Rolly's life really began to go on the up at the end of World War II. He bought a cheap block of land in Seaholme, near Williamstown in Melbourne, and built with his own hands a home for what would then be 4 children. In Seaholme, he made bricks using a mate's kiln, and it wasn't the warmest house. My mum talks about being in the house in the middle of winter and feeling the sea winds sweep through. But it was a home, and it was very different from the way he'd grown up. I'm telling you the story of Rolly because in some sense his story is the story of post-war Australia. The most remarkable increase in home ownership in Australian history occurred in a 7-year period from 1947 to 1954, when the home ownership rate shot up by 10 percentage points. By 1966, we'd gone to a country where almost 3/4 of Australians owned their own home. Not only the highest rate for Australia in the 20th century, but a higher rate than Britain or the United States experienced throughout the century. Home ownership now has fallen off a bit, but I think it's important to remember what a remarkable period that was. And it didn't happen by accident. There was a lot of concern about housing in the Depression period. There were people sleeping rough on the Domain. There were concerns about people fleeing family violence, not being able to get a home. There was a sense that without a home, people couldn't put down roots and have the stability that they needed to build a strong community. A report at the time suggested that Australia had a deficit of some 300,000 homes. And so we built them. And in that post-war decade, not only did home ownership rise, but unemployment plummeted. Australia had been a country in which unemployment was double-digit all the way from the end of World War I right through to the beginning of World War II. And after that, we managed to crack unemployment down to less than 2%. Curtin's Full Employment White Paper was a key to this. It laid out a plan for an ambitious Australia. As Curtin said, victory in the war, victory in the peace. Their idea wasn't just to snap back to 1939, but to use the opportunity of those post-war years to build something better. And they did. Rolly talked to me about the joy of those post-war years, and part of that joy came through the building of homes. Today, we face a similar challenge. The home ownership rate in Australia has dropped to its lowest level since 1954. Housing affordability is a huge challenge for many Australians. We know that for people fleeing family violence, it is harder than ever to find a roof over their own heads. We know for Indigenous communities that overcrowding is a serious issue. You know, it used to be, if you went back to the 1970s, home ownership rates didn't differ according to your income. Low-income people lived in smaller homes than high-income people, but home ownership rates were fairly similar across the income spectrum. Now that's all changed. Young Australians of modest means will struggle to get into a home. I remember talking in street stalls to a young couple one of whom was a public servant, the other of whom was a firefighter, and said to me, we don't know how we can afford a mortgage and raising a family. If one of us wants to take time out to care for the kids, we don't know how we're going to be able to buy a home. As you well know, Labor's answer to this is the Housing Australia Future Fund, a $10 billion investment which would see some 30,000 affordable and social homes built. Would also directly support more than 20,000 construction jobs. We'd use part of the proceeds of the funds to engage in improving the quality of Indigenous housing, which has dropped substantially over recent years. Labor recognises that home ownership is at the heart of many of the challenges that Australia faces. We've seen in recent years the initiatives such as Housing First, recognising that when people are in strife, very often fixing up their housing issues is the very first step you need to take. It's the cornerstone of getting people's lives back on track. A Common Ground facility, not far from my office in Gungahlin, has shown what you can do when you deal with people's housing problems first. I want to thank the work that Master Builders Australia have done in engaging with my colleague Jason Clare. I've known Danita Warren for a long time and can attest to her value in producing ideas and encouraging us to think big. And that's what an Albanese Labor government will do. We will think big and we will focus on building Australia back better than it was before the crisis. We recognise the value of the work that you do and we want to engage with you. Our ambition is for a nation that will combine fairness with prosperity. Exactly the sort of nation that Australia was at the end of World War II. Like Curtin, we will deliver a full employment white paper. And a big part of that will be thinking about how sectors such as construction can contribute to improving the situation that we face in Australia. Like Curtin, we have a situation where wages have flatlined for the better part of the last decade. In Curtin's time, real wages barely moved from the early 20s to the late 1930s. That's a problem that we can tackle. We need a more productive Australia, and an Australia in which all Australians see the benefits of home ownership. It's an ambitious agenda, but anyone that's a builder is no stranger to ambition. I want to wish you all the best for your conversation today, to thank you for the opportunity to engage with you, and to pledge to you that if Labor is given the chance to govern at the next election, we will take that ambitious home building agenda to the nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Andrew, and we appreciate your commitment to the industry. That concludes our Leaders Summit, the virtual federal election special edition. Thank you to all of our guest speakers and our partners. And while it was disappointing that we couldn't grill them as we normally do, it certainly sets the scene for things to come. The federal budget will be on 29 March, and we then anticipate an election being called soon thereafter for some time in May. Keep a lookout for our federal election campaign as we make sure that the federal politicians keep our industry front and centre of their decision making and inform you of what those decisions are as the major parties release their policies. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our political leaders on this election eve.